The bathroom tile is cold under your bare feet, and your hand lands on the edge of the sink before your mind has even caught up. That first stiff pause in the morning is usually blamed on age, but what you're feeling may be your body's biggest fascial sheet, waking up dry, compressed, and slow to glide. You know the moment I mean. The room is quiet, the light is thin, maybe the coffee hasn't even started dripping yet, and your lower back gives you that deep, dragging signal. Not sharp, not dramatic, just heavy, resistant. Like something across the belt line needs a few minutes to unseal before you can turn, bend, or walk normally. And then, later in the day, it fades. That detail matters more than most people realize, because permanent damage does not usually vanish by breakfast. So right now, do a quick scan. Don't move much yet. Just notice the low back, the back of the pelvis, maybe the space where your ribs meet that broad panel of tissue behind you. Is the sensation sitting deep, almost like a wide band? Does it feel bigger than one muscle? Good. Stay with that. That is where this story begins. For a long time, that hidden layer was treated like packing material. Surgeons cut through it to reach what they thought mattered more. Fascia was the wrapper, the filler, the background cloth. Then, the first International Fascia Research Congress at Harvard Medical School forced a correction. Researchers began speaking about it as living tissue with sensation, structure, and fluid behavior. In plain English, this stuff listens. It adapts. It holds water. It changes with age. And one region matters to you more than most. Thoracolumbar fascia rehydration, the body's largest fascial sheet. To dissolve morning stiffness starts with understanding that broad back sheet running through your lower spine, your pelvis, your rib cage. It helps transfer force every time you stand, twist, reach, or take a step. If it wakes up dense, your whole morning feels older than you are. If it wakes up hydrated, movement comes online faster. That's why the usual explanation misses the target. People say, "I'm getting older, things tighten up." But age is only part of the setting. The real drama happens while you sleep. Over the years, this tissue holds less water and produces less hyaluronan, that slippery substance that helps layers glide. Then you lie nearly motionless for hours, and the thoracolumbar sheet can end up crystallized overnight, which means the first step out of bed is a confrontation with chemistry. And if that chemistry can shift by morning, it can also be influenced by what you do in the first minutes after waking. So, if you want part 2, tap like and subscribe, because the old fix almost everyone reaches for is the wrong one. And this is where most people lose the trail. The moment that deep band across your low back feels stuck, your hands go to the obvious move. You lean forward. You hang there a little. Maybe you twist in the kitchen while the refrigerator hums and the floor still feels cool under your feet. It gives a brief sense of relief, sure. You feel something change. But if you pay attention, the change is slippery. It doesn't seem to reach the whole sheet. It doesn't seem to wake the back the way walking does a little later. That difference matters. Bring your attention there again now. Picture the broad panel across the back of your waist, into the top of the hips, up toward the lower ribs. When you hold one fixed position, does that area feel nourished or simply pulled? For muscle, a sustained hold can change length for a moment. For fascia, especially this large back sheet, rhythm does something very different. It creates alternating pressure. It invites fluid back in. It gives the tissue a reason to glide again. That's why the old systems did not build their morning work around hanging on a pose like a coat on a peg. The ancient Indian anatomists who described the prana kosha were tracking a living continuity through the body. They paired that view with motion that traveled, rose, returned, a wave, a pulse, a subtle seal at the base. Modern language gives you a cleaner mechanical picture. The material is full of water and hyaluronan, and it responds when load moves through it in cycles. Pressure, release. Pressure, release. That is how a dense sheet begins to loosen its morning grip. There's another detail here, and once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. The first minutes after waking form a rehydration window. The tissue is still close to the state the night created. It has not yet been stiffened further by sitting, driving, scrolling, or bracing through the day. If the first signal it receives is a dead hold, the response stays shallow. If the first signal is a rhythmic one, the thoracolumbar sheet starts behaving more like a hydrated fabric and less like something that was crystallized overnight. So try a small test in your mind before we go further. Think about the difference between wringing a damp towel once and gently pumping water back through cloth again and again. Your lower back is listening for the second pattern, and the strange part is, the missing piece was preserved in plain sight the whole time. In one simple pairing most people have heard named, but almost no one has been shown how to use. That pairing is simpler than it sounds, and stranger than most people expect. One half is familiar. You've probably seen cat-cow before, maybe in a yoga class, maybe as a quick back move someone tossed into a warm-up. But the old form was never meant to be a casual wiggle. It was a traveling wave through the spine, beginning low, passing through the waist, then rising through the ribs. The other half is the part almost always left out, Mula Bandha, the root lock. A small internal lift at the floor of the pelvis, subtle, quiet, easy to miss if nobody has ever shown you what it's for. And what it's for is exactly your morning problem. Bring your awareness back to that broad, low back panel, not the skin, under it, across the sacrum, into the back of the hips, climbing toward the lower ribs. When that region feels dense after sleep, it needs motion, yes, but it also needs containment. If the wave moves without that base, the motion stays loose and shallow, like sloshing water in an open bucket. When the root lock joins in, the body creates a more organized pressure from below. Suddenly, the movement has somewhere to travel through. The old yogic language called it sealing and lifting energy. A modern bodyworker would tell you it helps direct force through the fascial cylinder that includes the thoracolumbar sheet. Now notice how different that is from brute effort. This is not a hard squeeze. Your glutes don't clamp. Your jaw doesn't tighten. Your breath does not turn into a shove. The lock is light, almost secret. Imagine the faint sensation you'd use to stop a stream of urine, then soften it by half. That gives you the flavor. Too much and the system turns rigid. Too little and the wave leaks away before it reaches the place that woke up stiff. This is where the forgotten protocol starts to come back into focus. Ancient Indian anatomists had prana kosha as their map for the living web. Modern fascia research gave that web a different vocabulary, and over time the two pictures began to overlap in a fascinating way. One speaks of flow through a sheath. The other speaks of hydration, glide, and force transfer through living connective tissue. Different language, same haunted morning moment at the sink. The same low back asking for the right signal. So before I show you how the movement begins, test one small thing. Sit where you are or stand tall. Gently tip your pelvis forward and back without moving the chest much. Tiny motion, tiny. See if the stiffness lives right there at the base, waiting for the wave to start. Because once you find that hidden starting point, the whole method changes shape. That hidden starting point is lower than most people think. When you picture back stiffness, your mind jumps straight to the spine, as if the whole problem lives in the bones stacked up the center. But the morning drag often begins down in the bowl of the pelvis, where the base tension of the body meets that broad back sheet. If the pelvis wakes up dull and heavy, the rest of the chain follows it. The low back braces. The ribs stop gliding well. Even the first turn to reach for a towel can feel segmented, like your body is moving in pieces instead of one connected line. So try this slowly. Sit on the edge of the bed or stand with your fingers resting lightly on a counter. Tip the pelvis a fraction forward, then a fraction back. No big motion, no chest lifting to fake it. Keep the throat soft, the face quiet. You may notice the movement is tiny, almost embarrassingly small. Good. That's where the signal lives. It needs a clean beginning. And this is where age changes the chemistry of the whole experience. That living gel we talked about, full of water and hyaluronan, becomes less generous over time. After 40, it tends to hold less moisture and produce less of that slick internal lubricant. The result is subtle but brutal in the morning. The layers do not slide with the same ease. They drag. They cling. They ask for more movement than you gave them overnight. Now add 7 or 8 quiet hours in bed. The room cools. The blankets settle. Your body barely shifts. During all that stillness, the material in this region gets pressed and deprived of the gentle motion that normally helps move fluid through it. By morning, the tissue along the low back and pelvis can feel thickened, almost glued together in sensation. That is why the first step feels so strange. You are meeting something that was crystallized overnight and has not yet been invited back into motion. Place one hand at the back of your waist right now if you can, or imagine it there. Feel how broad the area is. This is why one hard stretch so often disappoints. You're dealing with a sheet, not a strap. Sheets respond to rolling pressure, changing angles, and repeated waves. They want sequence. And once you understand that, the old pairing starts to look less like a yoga cue and more like a device, a living internal mechanism. A small seal at the base, a wave through the spine. Together, they become something very close to a squeeze and flood pump. The only question is what position lets you feel it without forcing anything, and that's where the real practice finally begins. The real practice begins with getting the body into a shape where the wave can travel without strain. For most people, that means hands and knees. Palms on the floor, knees under the hips, the air a little cool against your forearms. The spine starting in a quiet middle place. If getting down there is awkward, you can use the bed instead. Hands planted on the mattress, hips back slightly. What matters is the angle. You want the low back free enough to move and the pelvis clear enough to speak first. Before anything else, settle your breath. Take one slow inhale and let it spread into the back ribs. Then let the exhale leave without forcing it. This matters because the sheet across the waist and pelvis responds badly to rush. If you throw speed at morning stiffness, the body often answers with bracing. The shoulders climb, the belly hardens, the neck takes over. Then the motion never reaches the place that needs it. So pause here for a second and feel where your weight is. Too far forward and the wrists carry the story. Too far back and the movement gets trapped in the hips. Now bring in that small root action again. Not a hard squeeze, not a dramatic lift, just that quiet gathering at the pelvic floor, enough to organize the base. You should still be able to breathe. Your jaw stays loose, your glutes stay mostly out of it. If you're clenching your whole backside, you've gone past the doorway. Back off. The old instruction was subtle for a reason. This form works through precision. Once that base is alive, do another scan. Can you feel the difference between the front of the belly gripping and the deeper base gently drawing upward? Good. That distinction is everything. One creates armor, the other creates direction. And here's the part most people never get taught. You begin lower. The pelvis starts the message. A tiny untuck, a tiny release. The motion rolls from the sacrum into the low back before the ribs ever join in. If the chest leads, the pattern becomes decorative. If the base leads, the thoracolumbar sheet starts to receive the signal it's been waiting for since you woke up. This is why the old pairing survived. It wasn't random. It was mechanical in the deepest sense. a body-made device for restoring glide during the rehydration window. That's also why rushing it ruins it. The first inch of movement tells you whether fluid is about to move through the back line, or whether the body is about to fake the whole thing with the neck and shoulders. And in a moment, you're going to feel the exact instant when the wave stops being an exercise and turns into transmission. That instant is small, and once you catch it, you understand why this old method survived. Start from the base, exactly where you felt that tiny pelvic motion a moment ago. On a soft inhale, let the pelvis tip just enough for the tail to drift back and the low back to begin opening from below. Do not throw the chest forward. Let the wave climb. Sacrum first, then the waist, then the ribs. The head follows last, almost as an afterthought. If you do it right, the movement feels less like posing and more like a ripple traveling under the skin. Then the exhale changes the direction. The pelvis tucks gently. The low back rounds first. The back ribs widen. The neck releases at the end instead of leading the whole thing like an actor trying to steal the scene. Keep that subtle root lock alive underneath it all. Very light, barely there. The floor presses into your hands. The breath brushes the inside of your ribs, and the broad sheet across your back begins to receive alternating pressure in a pattern it recognizes. This is where the old imagery of flow starts to make mechanical sense. Now slow it down even more. One inhale, one rising wave. One exhale, one returning wave. That's enough. You do not need a dramatic range. In fact, the people who force the biggest shape usually miss the feeling entirely. The real sign is quieter, a spreading warmth near the belt line, a sense that the low back is a linked chain beginning to distribute motion again. Maybe the tissue near the back of the pelvis feels less packed. Maybe the breath slips a little farther into the ribs. That is the body answering the signal. And there is a reason it can answer so quickly. Connective tissue is sensitive to changing load. When you move this way, you are not only shifting position, you are pressing and releasing a hydrated matrix that has been sitting still for hours. That repeated pressure can help draw fluid back through the area. In practical terms, the old form is acting like a squeeze and flood pump, not with violence, with rhythm. So do another scan while you're in it. Where is the motion smooth? Where does it catch? Does the stiffness bunch at the waist, or does it begin to spread upward and outward as the wave passes through? That little map tells you whether the thoracolumbar sheet is joining the movement or whether the body is still faking it with the shoulders and neck. Stay with 3 slow cycles in your mind, not 10, not a workout, 3 honest passes. By the third one, many people notice the first clear shift. And the shift is stranger than looseness, because it feels almost electrical. That electrical feeling is where the story gets even more interesting. People often describe it the same way, even if they don't have language for it. A little warmth, a faint hum in the low back, a sense that the area is waking up from the inside instead of being pulled from the outside. That impression is not random. Collagen-rich tissue has a strange property under load. When it is stressed and released, small electrical effects can appear in the material. So when the wave moves through the back line, you are dealing with more than shape. The tissue is responding mechanically, and in a subtle way, electrically too. You do not need to turn this into mysticism to feel how unusual that is. Put your attention on the belt line again. After a few slow cycles, does the region feel warmer than the skin around it? Does the stiffness feel duller, less sticky, less fused? Maybe the area near the sacrum feels as if someone opened a vent there. Maybe the ribs behind you start accepting breath without a fight. That shift is the clue. The body has begun communicating through the tissue again. This is one reason the old maps and modern language keep brushing up against each other. Prana Kosha described a living layer through which vitality could move well or move poorly. Contemporary fascia research speaks about hydration, force transfer, sensation, and signal. Different words, yes, but when the wave is done well, you can feel why older traditions guarded these methods. They were not preserving a stretch. They were preserving a way to wake a sheet of living material before the day hardened around it. And timing matters here more than people think. The early morning is a narrow rehydration window because the tissue has just come out of stillness. It has not yet been loaded by chairs, steering wheels, or long hours bent over a screen. In that brief phase, the back sheet is especially ready to change state. Give it a rhythmic message and it starts to reorganize. Ignore it or feed it only static holding, and the dense feeling can linger much longer into the day. So the goal this morning is to restore responsiveness. That is a much more useful target. Range can lie to you. Responsiveness tells the truth. Now, there is one more thing you need before this becomes a daily protocol instead of an interesting idea. You need to know how little is enough. Because the people who miss the effect usually do not fail from doing too little. They fail from adding too much, too soon, and drowning out the signal that was finally starting to come through. That too much problem shows up in the smallest mistakes. You wake up, feel the drag, and the instinct is to attack it. Bigger arch, bigger round, more pressure through the hands. Maybe even holding the end of the motion because it feels productive. But the back sheet does not open best under ambition. It opens under rhythm. So the daily protocol has to stay clean and short, especially at the beginning, while the signal is still easy to hear. Here's the first simple version. 1. Set yourself on hands and knees, or against the bed if the floor feels like too much that early. Find the quiet middle of the spine. Let the shoulders stop fussing. Let the neck stay out of the conversation. 2. Wake the base with that soft root lift, barely enough to notice. If your breath jams, you are overdoing it. If your glutes harden, back off. The seal has to stay almost invisible. 3. Send 3 slow waves through the spine, led from the pelvis. Inhale as the tail drifts back and the motion rises. Exhale as the tail curls under and the returning wave moves back through the waist and ribs. 3 cycles only at first. That is enough to test whether the tissue is responding. 4. Pause. Stay there for 1 breath and scan. This pause matters more than people expect. Feel the palms against the floor. Feel the air on the back of your neck. Notice the area across the belt line and the back of the hips. Has the heaviness changed texture? Not vanished, changed. A little warmer, a little wider, a little less fused. That is the kind of response you are looking for. Thoracolumbar fascia rehydration, the body's largest fascial sheet, to dissolve morning stiffness, begins with that shift in quality before it shows up as bigger movement. And if nothing changes yet, do not pile on effort. Change the precision instead. Slow the wave. Shrink the shape. Start lower from the pelvis. Soften the jaw. Most people miss the effect because they perform the motion on top of the body, while the actual conversation needs to happen lower and deeper. There is another reason this short protocol works better than a long routine. Connective tissue tends to respond to cycles of load and release, then reorganize after the movement ends. You are not trying to win the whole morning inside 1 minute. You are giving the system a clearer first instruction while the state from sleep is still fresh. So after those 3 waves and that 1 breath pause, there is a final step almost nobody includes. And without it, the body can slip right back into the same old pattern the moment you stand. That final step is how you keep the change from evaporating. After the 3 slow waves and that 1 breath pause, you do not stay on the floor chasing more sensation. You come up carefully and let the body test the new pattern upright. Hands off the ground, feet under you. Let the soles meet the floor fully. There may still be coolness in the room, a little stiffness in the ankles, the faint smell of coffee somewhere nearby. But now the low back has a different job. It has to carry the new glide into standing. This is where you check whether the message actually reached the sheet. Stand still for a second and notice the belt line again. Is the weight more even right to left? Does the area across the back of the pelvis feel less compacted? Then take a few slow steps. Just a small, normal walk across the room, or even in place. The point is simple. Gait loads the back line in alternating patterns, and that helps the tissue use what the wave just restored. If you go straight from the floor to a chair, the body often snaps back into the old guarded arrangement before the change has a chance to settle. This is why the old protocol was more complete than it first appears. The wave wakes the region. Upright walking teaches it how to keep the new organization under real load. One is preparation, the other is integration. Together, they turn a brief movement ritual into a useful morning reset. So give yourself another scan while standing. Turn slightly to one side, then the other. Hinge a few inches forward and come back up. Pay attention to texture, not performance. Does the movement feel less gritty? Does the low back stop shouting quite so early? Sometimes the shift is obvious. Sometimes it's small, like a door that opens with less scraping than it did 5 minutes ago. That still counts. And here's the strange thing many people miss. The full benefit is not always finished the moment you stop moving. Connective tissue often keeps reorganizing after the loading is over. You give it a clean signal, then the system continues the conversation in the background. That is why a very short morning practice can change the feel of the next hour more than a much longer random routine done later. But it also means this can be ruined in a very ordinary way. If the next thing you do is drop into a chair, fold over a phone, brace through a commute, or freeze the pelvis again for a long stretch, the body gets a conflicting instruction before the new pattern has stabilized. The old density starts whispering its way back in. So the question is no longer whether the wave works. The question is what your first 10 minutes after it are teaching the sheet to become. Those first 10 minutes are where the morning either opens or closes again. You have already given the back line a better instruction on the floor. Now the question is, what comes immediately after? If you shuffle to a chair and fold your body into the same old shape, the tissue gets pressed into a familiar pattern before the new glide has time to spread. The low back stiffens quietly. The pelvis goes dim again. By the time you notice it, you think the wave didn't work, when really the next habit drowned it out. So here is the cleaner follow-through. After you stand and take those few slow steps, stay upright a little longer. Let your arms swing naturally as you walk to the kitchen or down the hall. Reach for something overhead without forcing it. Turn gently to one side, then the other. Let the spine and pelvis keep talking to each other in normal life. This matters because the tissue around the waist does not only respond during formal practice, it keeps adapting to the pattern you feed it next. You can feel this for yourself. Do a quick scan right now in your mind. Imagine finishing the wave and then slumping over a phone for 10 minutes. Now imagine finishing the wave and staying tall, walking, breathing, letting the ribs and hips keep moving. Those two mornings do not feel the same in the body. One seals the old density back in. The other gives the new pattern room to spread. This is also why some people swear they felt a shift one day, then lost it the next. They assume the tissue changed randomly. Usually it didn't. The follow-through changed. The first instruction got interrupted. A short protocol depends on context more than people realize. The body listens to sequence. And there is another trap here, smaller but very common. People feel a little better after the first few waves. Then they start adding extras. Deep toe touches, long holds, aggressive twisting. The room is still quiet. The blood is barely up. And now they pile a bunch of unrelated moves on top of the signal that was finally getting clear. That often muddies the response. Too many messages at once. The smarter move is restraint. Let the wave do its work. Let upright walking carry it. Let the tissue keep reorganizing while you move through ordinary tasks. In other words, stop trying to finish the whole problem in one burst of effort before breakfast. Because once you respect that sequence, one more pattern becomes obvious. The mornings that feel worst are often the mornings when you miss the timing, and the timing is tied to something deeper than convenience. It is tied to the body's clock. That clock matters more than it sounds. The tissue along your low back does not rebuild itself in some vague, timeless way. It follows rhythms. During sleep and waking, connective tissue shifts what it is doing, when it is making components, when it is organizing them, when it is more ready to respond to load. Researchers have been tracing those daily cycles more closely in recent years, and the picture that keeps emerging is simple enough to use. Timing changes behavior. The body you wake up in is not the same as the body you have at noon. You've felt that without naming it. The first bend of the morning has one texture. Later in the day, the same bend feels different, even if your life circumstances are identical. That tells you something important. The back sheet is not only reacting to how much you moved yesterday, it is also reacting to where it is in its own cycle right now. This is why the rehydration window is so powerful. The tissue is fresh from stillness, dense from the night, and highly sensitive to the very first mechanical message it receives. Now think about what usually happens instead. The alarm goes off, the room is dim, maybe the air is dry, maybe your mouth still tastes stale from sleep. And before the low back has received any useful wave, you slump over the edge of the bed, stare into a screen, sit at a table, or brace through the rush of getting moving. In other words, the first message the tissue hears is compression plus stillness. The old pattern gets reinforced before the new one even has a chance to speak. That is why two people can have the same age, the same sleep length, even the same general health, and still have completely different mornings. The difference is often sequence. One body gets an early rhythmic signal through the pelvis, spine, and walking pattern. The other gets folded and parked. Do a quick scan again. Picture the low back right at waking, before the day starts stacking on top of it. Can you sense how impressionable that state is? Impressionable. This is where the ancient pairing becomes almost surgical in its timing. A light root seal, a small wave, then upright steps. The order matters, because the body clock has made that period unusually responsive. And here is the part that changes the emotional weight of all this. If morning stiffness is tied to timing, then it is less of a fixed verdict than it feels when you're half awake and bracing at the sink. It means the body is giving you a repeatable opening, the same way every day. Miss it, and the old chemistry takes the lead. Catch it, and something begins shifting before your mind even starts its usual story about getting older. Which raises a harder question. If the opening is that reliable, why do so many people perform the right movement and still feel almost nothing? The reason is usually not that the body refused the method, it's that the method got blurred on the way in. Most people miss the response in one of four ways. They go too big, they go too fast, they grip the wrong place, or they wait too long and try to do the whole thing after the body has already been folded into the day. All four mistakes feel harmless in the moment. All four can flatten the signal. The first mistake is size. A huge arch through the spine looks impressive, but it often bypasses the deeper conversation. The ribs flare, the neck cranes, the shoulders dump forward, and the low back gets a flashy movement instead of a clean wave. The second mistake is speed. Fast motion can create heat, sure. The target is response. The tissue around the waist needs time to accept pressure, then release it. Rush that cycle, and the back starts performing instead of listening. Then there is the third mistake: gripping the front so hard that the base disappears. People hear core and immediately clamp the belly. They bear down. They harden the throat. They turn the practice into effort. But the quiet lift of Mula Bandha is different. It organizes. It does not bulldoze. If your breath gets trapped high in the chest, if the jaw feels tight, if your face looks like you're trying to win something, you've probably left the right channel. And the fourth mistake is timing. This one fools a lot of people because the movement may still feel pleasant later, but pleasant is not the same as potent. If you miss the early window and try the wave after a long sit, after the commute, after the screen time, the tissue is already responding to a whole stack of other instructions. You can still help it, of course, but the cleanest opening has already narrowed. So here's a better way to troubleshoot it. Ask yourself one question after the wave. Where did I feel the motion first? If the answer is neck, shoulders, or chest, the signal probably started too high. If the answer is, I'm not sure, but I felt something broad near the back of the pelvis, you are much closer. That broadness is a good sign. The thoracolumbar sheet tends to announce itself as spread. Try another scan in your mind. Put one hand at the low back, one at the lower belly. Which side wants to dominate? If the front is doing all the work, soften it. If the base feels asleep, reduce the size of the movement and find it again. Because once the signal begins in the right place, one tiny change appears almost immediately, and it is the clearest proof you're finally talking to the right layer. That tiny change is rarely dramatic from the outside. Nobody watching you would say, "Ah, there it is." The proof is quieter than that. You stand up, and the first few seconds no longer feel like you're assembled in separate pieces. The turn toward the sink is smoother. The bend to pick something up is less guarded. The low back does not fire the same early warning at the same intensity. That's the sign. A different quality of motion. And that distinction matters because people chase the wrong evidence all the time. They want a bigger stretch sensation, a deeper fold, a louder pop, some obvious performance marker. But the layer you're dealing with often tells the truth through distribution. Motion spreads more evenly. The ribs help. The pelvis participates. The waist stops hoarding all the strain. When that happens, the body feels younger in a very specific way, more continuous. Pause for a real scan now, the kind you would do in your own kitchen or bedroom. Stand tall. Turn your shoulders and hips gently to one side, then back. Do the other side. Then hinge a few inches forward and return. Ask one simple question. Is the resistance still concentrated in one stubborn band, or has it started to spread out and soften? If it is spreading, even a little, you are getting through. This is the moment many people mistake for nothing much happened, and then they abandon the protocol too early. That's a shame, because this subtle shift is usually the first honest sign that the tissue has begun reorganizing. Connective layers often change their feel before they show a dramatic visual result. First comes the change in signal, then the change in movement, then, with repetition, the change in the whole morning. And once you experience that even once, the story you tell yourself about age starts cracking. Because a fixed structural loss does not usually improve in this patterned, repeatable way. A state problem does. A timing problem does. A hydration problem in a living sheet does. The fact that the body can feel different within minutes is not a reason to dismiss it. It is the very clue you should trust. This is also why the old language of pranakosha stayed alive. People could feel that something invisible yet physical was changing inside the body's web. Today, fascia research gives you another frame for the same event. Different maps, same morning sensation, same relief when the right signal finally lands. But here's where the real test begins. A single good morning can feel convincing and still disappear if you treat it like a trick instead of a ritual. The body needs the message often enough that the new response becomes familiar, and that means the next step is not more intensity, it is consistency. Consistency is where this stops feeling like a trick and starts becoming a relationship with the tissue. You are not trying to overpower the morning. You are teaching the same area, the same clean lesson often enough that it begins to expect it. That changes everything. The low back no longer greets the day with the same confusion. The pelvis finds the starting point faster. The wave travels with less negotiation. Even the standing step afterward becomes more natural because the body remembers the order. That's the strange mercy in all this. The stiffness may feel personal, like your body has singled you out, but the response to rhythm is wonderfully impersonal. The tissue answers the input, again and again. Give it a rushed morning, it adapts to rush. Give it compression and stillness, it adapts to that. Give it a clear wave in the right window, and over time it starts organizing around that instead. So the protocol stays small on purpose. Wake. Find the base. 3 slow waves. Stand. Walk. That's it at first, because short sequences are repeatable, and repeatable signals are how the backsheet learns. People underestimate this. They assume the breakthrough has to feel heroic. Usually it feels ordinary enough to keep doing. Try imagining 2 weeks of that ordinary repetition. Same floor, same quiet room, same little exhale through the nose, same hand pressure into the ground, same wave beginning low and rising through the spine. What changes first is often not the body in a dramatic sense. It is your trust in the process. Then the first step hesitation shortens. Then the turn at the sink gets easier. Then one morning you realize you moved before thinking about moving. That is when the protocol has started sinking below conscious effort. And still, one danger remains. People feel improvement and immediately start decorating the ritual. They add complexity. They skip the scan. They rush because it's working now. Or they replace the sequence with random mobility clips they saw somewhere else. That often weakens the result. The tissue does not need novelty nearly as much as the mind does. So keep one thing sacred: the order. Base first, wave second, upright integration third. If you protect that order, the body can begin meeting the morning differently. If you scramble it, the old density can return, even while you think you are doing all the right movements. Now, before we close in on the final test, there is one last shift you need to make. You have to stop measuring success by how flexible you look, and start measuring it by what the very first step tells you tomorrow. Tomorrow's first step is the honest judge, because it arrives before your excuses do. Before the coffee smell reaches you, before the phone lights your face, before the day starts assigning meaning to every sensation, the body tells the truth. You swing your legs over, your feet meet the floor, and there it is. Either the low back grips with that old familiar drag, or it doesn't grip the same way. That first contact with the ground is cleaner than any mirror, any flexibility test, any clever theory. So this is how you measure it. Tomorrow morning, do not look for drama. Look for delay. How long does it take the body to trust movement? Is there that same half-second hesitation before you straighten? Do you brace before turning? Does the area across the back of the pelvis feel fused or merely sleepy? These are better questions than, am I looser? Because they point straight at the state of the tissue. If you did the sequence properly the morning before, and if you protected those first minutes afterward, the answer often shifts in small but undeniable ways. The first step lands with less caution. The waist does not feel as though it needs to be pried open. The pelvis joins the motion sooner. You may still feel age in the body, sure, but it no longer feels like the same closed gate. And when that happens 2 or 3 mornings in a row, something important breaks loose in the mind. You stop treating stiffness like a sentence. You start seeing it as a pattern, a chemical state, a mechanical timing issue in a living sheet that can be influenced. That is a huge emotional change, maybe bigger than the physical one at first. Because hopelessness makes people passive. Recognition makes them precise. This is why the protocol does not need to impress anyone. It only needs to create a reliable before and after in the most private moment of the day. Bedroom to standing, standing to walking. That is the laboratory. That is where the thoracolumbar sheet reveals whether it stayed dense from the night or began to reorganize under a better instruction. Now, I want you to make one more scan in advance. Picture tomorrow morning in detail. The dim room, the weight of the blanket coming off, the cool floor, the first breath upright, the turn toward the door. Put your attention exactly there, because that is where your body will tell you whether this has become real. And if the answer is, "I'm not sure," good. That uncertainty means you are finally paying attention to the right thing. Because in the next part, we bring all of this down to the simplest possible daily rite, the version you can repeat without thinking, and the one detail that makes people either keep it for months or quietly let it disappear. That repeatable rite is almost embarrassingly simple, and that simplicity is exactly why it survives. You wake up, before the screen, before the chair, before you hand the morning over to habit. You give the body the same short sequence in the same order. Find the base. 3 slow waves. Stand. Walk. No negotiation. No searching for inspiration. No adding random extras because your mind is bored. The ritual works best when it is smaller than your excuses. That is the detail people either protect or lose. If the practice depends on motivation, it fades. If it depends on memory, it gets crowded out. But if it is attached to a fixed moment, feet to floor, hands to bed or mat, 1 breath, 3 waves, it stops being a decision and becomes part of waking. The tissue loves that kind of predictability. The nervous system does too. The thoracolumbar sheet begins receiving the same early message day after day, and the body starts meeting it with less resistance. You can make this easier on yourself in a very plain way. Leave the space ready. Clear the rug. Keep a little room beside the bed. Know where your hands are going before you're half awake and fumbling in dim light. That may sound trivial, but it matters. Friction kills rituals. Smooth setups keep them alive. And the longer the ritual survives, the more the body trusts it. This is where a lot of people finally understand what they've been missing. They kept looking for a powerful technique when what they actually needed was a reliable doorway. The movement itself is not dramatic. The doorway is. Morning after morning, you are intercepting the state the night created before the day hardens it further. That is why a tiny practice can change something that has felt stubborn for years. Do another scan in your imagination. Tomorrow morning, where will you place your hands? What will the room feel like? What is the first object you usually reach for that steals the sequence from you? The phone, the coffee maker, the bathroom sink. Good. See it clearly. That is the point where the old morning and the new one split apart. Because here is the real battle now. It is no longer between you and stiffness. It is between the ritual and distraction. The body will answer the sequence if you give it the chance. The harder part is guarding that chance. And once you do guard it, something almost unsettling begins to happen. The first step dread that used to feel inevitable starts losing its authority, and the low back begins telling a different story before the day has even found its voice. That different story is what changes the whole emotional charge of waking up. For a long time, the morning may have felt like a verdict. You stand, you brace, you wait, and a quiet thought moves in. Here we go again. That thought gets heavy over the years. It makes the body feel older than it is because it wraps meaning around sensation. But once you understand what the tissue is doing, how it densifies with stillness, how age shifts its moisture chemistry, how the right wave changes its behavior, that old verdict starts losing power. The body has not been mocking you. It has been following rules. That matters. Because when you believe the problem is vague decline, you either resign yourself to it or you fight it randomly. When you understand it as a repeatable state in a living sheet, your attention sharpens. You stop throwing moves at the wall. You begin meeting the morning with timing, sequence, and enough respect to let the body answer in its own language. This is the bridge between the ancient map and the modern one. Prana Kosha gave earlier practitioners a way to feel the living continuity of the body. Fascia research gave that continuity a contemporary frame: sensation, hydration, force transfer, organization under load. Two different vocabularies, yes, but both point you back to the same intimate event, that first low back signal after sleep, and the possibility of changing it on purpose. So scan yourself one more time, emotionally. When you imagine tomorrow morning, does it feel predetermined? Or does it feel adjustable? That shift right there may be the most important one of all. Once the morning stops feeling predetermined, the body becomes a place of response again, instead of a place of bad news. And notice, none of this required a grand promise. No miracle, no denial of age. No fantasy that the body should feel 20 forever. What it asks for is much simpler and much more demanding. Attention, repetition, respect for the timing, respect for the order, respect for the fact that connective tissue listens when you speak to it clearly. That is why this protocol was worth recovering. Not because it is exotic, not because it sounds ancient, because it restores agency in the exact place people usually surrender it first, the first step of the day. That is a powerful thing. And now the ending is very close. There is only one final move left in this whole story. The single experiment that proves to you whether the thoracolumbar fascia rehydration you've heard about here is still an idea in your head or has actually become something your body can feel. That experiment happens in a room so ordinary most people would miss how important it is. Morning. The sheets are warm, the air outside them a little cool. Your heel finds the floor, then the other one. For a second, you wait for the old drag to arrive on schedule, that familiar low back tolling that used to greet the day before your thoughts were fully awake. But this time, the body does something quieter. The pelvis joins the stand sooner. The turn toward the doorway comes without the same guarded pause. The back still feels like a body, not a machine made overnight into stone. And in that plain, unglamorous moment, thoracolumbar fascia rehydration stops being a theory you heard and becomes a fact your own morning can verify. You know it because the body no longer asks permission for the first step. That is the wisdom hiding inside this whole recovered right. A window left shut all night does not need a hammer in the morning. It needs the latch lifted in the right place and the weight taken off it for a second. The back is often the same way. Give it the right sequence at the right hour, and what looked sealed can begin moving with surprisingly little drama. The old practitioners guarded the wave and the root lock because they understood that some doors open from pressure, others from timing. A few minutes later, the room is brighter. The blanket is folded back. The floor has lost its chill. Somewhere nearby, water runs, a cup is set down, and the morning goes on without demanding a negotiation from your spine. If you felt that shift in your body, write "first step" below. That's the phrase for this one.